Everyone, Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. And today in Bible study, we looked at Hosea's chapter 11 and 12. And there was one phrase that stuck out to me during my preparation for this Bible study from the ESV commentary. And it was covenant election means covenant responsibility. Now, that's not actually said in the text. That was one of the footnotes, right? But I actually think that footnote is really good at summing up what the issue of these two chapters is. Covenant election equals covenant responsibility. What that means is that Israel has been elected by God to be his covenanted chosen people, and they have responsibility in that relationship to do what God has required them to do. And in chapters 11 and 12 of Hosea, we see this spelled out kind of in two different ways, but it's all looking back to the past, specifically with Jacob. The reason that Jacob's so important is that he's one of the patriarchs. So the patriarchs is a term that's used kind of for the leaders of the Hebrews, or the ancestors of the Hebrews before the Exodus. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is usually the three that are mentioned. But Jacob in particular is important because it's Jacob whose name is Israel, right? So God's using a lot of wordplay here. He gets that name by striving with God, wrestling with him, trying to get a blessing from him, right? And God brings that up here and says, well, just like your ancestor Jacob used to do that, why haven't you guys done that? Because again, Hosea is all about calling out the people of this time for engaging in terribly brutal and evil practices brought on by the worship of foreign gods. That's what's going on. And Israel is vacillating between the two different superpowers, trying to play them off each other, Egypt and Assyria, and eventually Assyria is going to go conquer them. And so what happens is God uses a lot of Old Testament imagery from the Exodus and from the patriarchs in order to make this point clear, right? We already talked about how the connections with Jacob, right, and the wrestling, and when he's wrestling with God, he's renamed Israel, so there's a literal name connection there. But interestingly enough, right, there's other ones, and different threads to pick up on. Now, I would be kind of remiss if I didn't bring up maybe the part of this that's most famous for Christians, which is the first verse of chapter 11:1, where it says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." That line, "out of Egypt I called my son," appears in the Gospel of Matthew to refer to when Jesus as an infant is brought out of Egypt into back to Nazareth, where he grows up. And so that's why so you might be like, well, this all of this in this Hosea, right? God is not using this as messianic prophecy. Or at least it's not intended primarily as that, right? It's mostly intended to say, hey, this is what you guys were. You guys were slaves in Egypt, right? But I called you out of it, right? That's that Exodus imagery. The reason that Matthew uses it is he sees in this another promise that is being fulfilled, right? Because, spoiler alert, Israel does not do what Hosea asks them to do, right? God says, do these things, and they don't listen. But Jesus, as the true Israel, does follow. So that's why Matthew brings it up. But here, right, God has this very personal connection with the people, with Ephraim, right, who's the northern kingdom. He says how he will not let them go. He taught them how to walk, all these other sorts of things. And so this is really an appeal, and he's saying there's going to be judgment. And the first half, right, 11 kind of through almost all of chapter 11 is a more positive recollection of the past, and chapter 12 is more negative. But you'll notice that there's this constant claim for restoration. I mean, there's this great line in 11:9, right, where God says, "I will not execute my burning anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not a man, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath." So you see there's kind of a difference, right, between mankind that is, who seek vengeance for the things that has been done wrong, but God actually seeks holiness and ultimately restoration, right? Because he's going to bring them back to the land that they are going to be in. And so there's this paternal and loving connection, but just because they've done so much wrong, and they've forgotten the lessons of their ancestors. They've not lived up to the faith. And not that Jacob was a great guy. God makes mention of a few things here that are not so great about what Jacob did. But the ultimate point that God is making is Jacob turned away from those things and went to the Lord. And that's what he wants Israel to do. Now, Israel will not do this, but as Christians, this is a constant good reminder for us as God's Israel, right? The Israel of God, as we're referred to in the New Testament. What are we doing in order to turn ourselves away from the bad things and towards God's covenant love for us? And because we have been covenantly elected, right, God has chosen us, we have covenant responsibility to act according to that choice. So that's what we talked about. There's not going to be a new thing tomorrow. I'm on vacation or next week. So no Bible study next week, but later in July, I'll see you guys then, and you guys have a good July 4th. Peace out.